Today, we bring you 3 lockdown stories that were shared online by actual people. These stories, born from the depths of lockdowns, whether in the hushed, tense classrooms of a school under threat, the isolated corridors of a hotel caught in the grip of a storm, or the suffocating solitude of a home during a global pandemic, invite us to explore the unsettling and suspenseful experiences of those who lived them. Join us as we once again step into the shadows, where the veil between our world and the unknown grows thin, and the stories we uncover challenge our understanding of what is real and what lurks just beyond our perception. The chill of the autumn air nipped at my skin as I shuffled through the crowded hallways of Greenwood High, the mundane chatter of students blending into a familiar and comforting noise. Little did I know, the day's ordinary beginning was a deceptive prelude to an experience that would haunt my dreams for years to come. It happened just after lunch, as we settled into the rhythm of afternoon classes. The sudden blare of the PA system cut through the air like a siren. Principal Harris's voice, usually a beacon of calm, now fraught with an urgency that sent a shiver down my spine. "Lockdown. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." The message was stark, its implications terrifyingly clear. My classmates and I exchanged bewildered glances, the weight of reality settling upon us as Mrs. Thompson sprang into action. She hurried to lock the door and draw the blinds, her movements swift but shaking. We were instructed to huddle in the corner farthest from the door, our bodies pressed together in a mass of fear and confusion. The room was plunged into a tense silence, broken only by the sound of our collective breathing and the distant, muffled noises that filtered through the walls. It was in this uncanny quiet that the severity of our situation began to truly sink in. We were trapped, unsure of the danger lurking beyond the confines of our classroom. Time stretched and warped, minutes feeling like hours as we waited in our dim corner. Whispers of what might be happening outside filled the space between us, each rumor more frightening than the last. Was there someone in the school? What did they want? The not knowing was the worst part, our imaginations conjuring horrors far beyond our understanding. Suddenly, a faint noise shattered the silence, a series of thumps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. My heart raced, pounding so loudly, I feared it would give us away. Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened, a silent command for absolute stillness. The thumps grew closer, then stopped just beyond our door. We held our breath, the air thick with fear, as the doorknob rattled gently, a silent testament to the terror on the other side. The moment stretched into eternity until the noise receded, footsteps fading into the distance, leaving behind a haunting echo of what might have been. The relief that washed over us was short-lived, replaced by the gripping realization of our vulnerability. It was hours later when the lockdown was finally lifted, Principal Harris's voice once again filling the room, this time to announce the all clear. The intruder, later identified as Michael Simmons, was a former student of Greenwood High, having graduated 2 years prior. He had been a quiet, unassuming figure during his time at the school, blending into the backdrop of high school life with an ease that made him nearly invisible. After graduation, Michael faced numerous challenges, struggling to find his footing in a world that seemed increasingly alien and indifferent to his struggles. With each passing day, the weight of his isolation grew heavier, pushing him further into the depths of his own turmoil. On that fateful day, Michael returned to Greenwood High, drawn by a longing for a past that felt simpler, more secure. He had no plan, no intention of causing harm. His arrival was an act of desperation, an attempt to find solace in the familiarity of the school's halls and classrooms. However, his presence quickly sparked panic. As he aimlessly wandered the corridors, his actions were misinterpreted as menacing, doors slamming shut behind him, the echo of his footsteps in the empty hallways, and his refusal to respond to the calls of the few staff members who still recognized him, cast a shadow of fear across the school. Michael, lost in his own world of confusion and sorrow, remained oblivious to the lockdown he had inadvertently caused, to the terror that gripped the hearts of students hiding in the darkness. When the police finally apprehended him, They found a young man more scared and confused than the frightened students he had unintentionally terrorized. Michael offered no resistance, his expression one of bewilderment and regret as the reality of the situation dawned on him. In his hands, they found not weapons, but old yearbooks, pages worn from frequent handling, each page a testament to the memories he clung to. The officers led him away, his head bowed, a poignant symbol of the invisible struggles that can drive individuals to seek refuge in the ghosts of their past. As we emerged from our hiding place, the school felt different, as if the very walls had absorbed our fear and would forever bear its mark. The sunlight streaming through the windows seemed harsh, a glaring reminder of the world outside, indifferent to our ordeal. The experience at Greenwood High changed us all, a shared trauma that would bind us together even as we struggled to move forward. We learned lessons in bravery, in vulnerability, and in the profound strength found in the midst of fear. But above all, we learned that sometimes, the scariest stories are the ones that can happen to any one of us, on any given day, in the most familiar of places. As a frequent traveler, I've stayed in more hotels than I can count, each blending into a seamless memory of identical rooms and continental breakfasts. But there is one stay that stands out vividly against the blur of forgettable check-ins and check-outs, a story I seldom share for fear of the disbelief and raised eyebrows it inevitably invites. It was during a particularly fierce winter storm that I found myself stranded at a small, nondescript hotel in a town whose name I've since forgotten. The snow had begun as a picturesque flurry, but quickly escalated into a howling blizzard that rendered the roads impassable. The hotel, a cozy refuge against the storm's fury, quickly instituted a lockdown for the safety of its guests and the few staff who could not make it home. The lockdown was an inconvenience, but not an unfamiliar one, and I settled into my room with a book, resigned to a quiet evening alone. But as the wind screamed against the windows, a feeling of unease began to take root in my mind, a prickling sense of being watched that I couldn't shake. I chalked it up to the storm and the eerie way it seemed to isolate us from the rest of the world. As night deepened, the power flickered and then went out entirely, plunging my room into darkness save for the pale bluish glow of the snow outside. It was then that I heard it, a soft, persistent knocking at my door. Pausing only to wrap myself in a blanket, I approached cautiously, wondering if perhaps one of the hotel staff had come with candles or instructions. But when I opened the door, the hallway was empty, lit only by the emergency lights casting long shadows across the carpet. The knocking had stopped, replaced by a silence that seemed almost louder than the storm outside. Confused and more than a little frightened, I closed the door and retreated to the safety of my bed. The knocking returned throughout the night, sometimes accompanied by what sounded like whispered voices, too low to make out any words. Each time I would brave the darkness to check, finding nothing but the empty, silent hallway. Sleep was an impossibility. Every creak and sigh of the building set my heart racing. Every shadow seemed to move just beyond the corner of my vision. In the morning, the storm had passed, and the world was a bright, blank canvas of snow. The power was back, and with it, the comforting hum of normalcy. I ventured down to the lobby, eager for the company of other guests and the details of the road clearings. As I passed the front desk, I mentioned the disturbances of the night before, expecting an apology or at least an explanation. But the clerk looked genuinely puzzled. "You must have been dreaming," she said, her eyes sincere. "The rooms next to yours were empty last night. In fact, you were the only guest on that entire floor." I left the hotel as soon as I could, the clerk's words echoing in my mind. The logical part of me wanted to dismiss the entire experience as a trick of the storm, a product of isolation and the power of suggestion. But another part, a deeper, more instinctual part, knew there was something more. Something that whispered in the dark and knocked on doors that shouldn't have been answered. To this day, I can't explain what happened during that lockdown. I've stayed in countless hotels since, but I always check the occupancy of the neighboring rooms now, and I never ignore the feeling of being watched. The memory of that night remains, a reminder of the unseen guests we sometimes encounter, in the places between places, where the veil of the ordinary grows thin. The world had come to a standstill. Streets emptied and skies cleared as humanity retreated indoors, hiding from an unseen enemy that had swiftly claimed not just cities, but continents. My apartment, once a sanctuary of solitude and peace, had morphed into a prison of isolation amidst the global pandemic. As days blurred into weeks, the initial novelty of solitude was usurped by an encroaching sense of unease, further magnified by the constant barrage of news and the infinite scroll of the internet, each headline more dire than the last. The death tolls rose daily, each number a stark reminder of the virus's lethal reach. Images of overcrowded hospitals and stories of overwhelmed healthcare workers haunted me, the scale of human suffering beyond anything I could have imagined. The uncertainty was the worst part. The gnawing fear of catching the virus, the worry for loved ones, and the pervasive dread of not knowing when or if this nightmare would end. The world outside my window seemed increasingly foreign, a dystopian reality where the simple act of breathing could be fatal. As the lockdown stretched interminably, the once comforting solitude of my apartment morphed into a tangible confinement, a cage from which there was no escape. The days melded into each other, marked only by the gradual emergence of disturbances that crept into my daily existence like uninvited guests. Objects not only misplaced, but found in inexplicably impossible locations. Doors not just ajar, but swinging open as if pushed by an unseen force, and shadows that danced and flickered at the periphery of my vision, growing bolder with each passing day. Rational explanations dwindled, leaving a void filled by an oppressive atmosphere, thick with the anticipation of an unseen presence lurking just out of sight. The air seemed heavier, charged with a static of unspoken words and unfulfilled intents. One night, amidst the deafening silence that had become my constant companion, the sound of footsteps emerged, distinct and deliberate, as if carved from the quiet itself. My heart thrummed a frantic rhythm against my ribcage, each beat a drum of war against the encroaching terror. The footsteps grew closer, unhurried, savoring the fear that thickened the air. They halted beside my bed, the very proximity of the sound a violation of my last refuge. Frozen, I lay there, the blanket a meager shield against the weight of an unseen gaze that seemed to press down on me with an almost physical force. In a moment of reckless defiance, I whispered into the darkness, challenging the intruder I could not see. The response was a suffocating silence, a mockery that echoed louder than any retort. Come morning, the light that spilled through the cracks of my curtains offered no respite, casting long shadows that seemed to jeer at the night's ordeal. The terror that had seized me in the night fragmented into pieces of a nightmare that refused to end with wakefulness. Yet the unease that knotted my stomach was a constant reminder of the night's reality. The lockdown, with its endless expanse of days filled with the grim chorus of tragic news, had frayed the very fabric of my reality. The boundary between the world outside and the world within blurred, each becoming indistinguishable from the other, a miasma of fear, isolation, and the haunting presence that shared my confinement. Trapped within the four walls of my apartment, escape was an unattainable dream. The pandemic raged on outside, a silent hunter that made the space beyond my door as perilous as the one within. The fear of the virus, invisible and ever-present, barred me from seeking refuge elsewhere, forcing me to confront the haunting that had infiltrated my home. My sanctuary had become my cell, and I, both the prisoner and the warden, caught in a lockdown with an unseen entity that seemed to feed off my fear. In this enforced solitude, the lines between reality and the creations of my frayed psyche blurred, leaving me to question what horrors were born of the virus outside and what were conjured by the storm within. As I ventured into online forums, sharing my experiences and seeking solace in the stories of others, I found I was not alone. Many spoke of similar phenomena, shadows born not from the world but from the mind, a collective manifestation of our deepest fears and anxieties. It dawned on me that perhaps the presence I felt, the disturbances that plagued my nights, were not supernatural, but the manifestations of my psyche, grappling with the unprecedented global crisis and the constant barrage of death and despair. In the end, The possibility that my experiences were rooted in psychological reasons, acute stress, or a mind pushed to the brink by isolation and fear, offered little comfort. It was a stark reminder of the pandemic's unseen toll, not just on our bodies but on our mental health. As the world slowly edged towards a semblance of normality, the shadows receded, but the imprint of those dark months remained, a reminder of the fragility of the human mind when faced with the unimaginable.